Great. So to start this off, how has life been for you during the pandemic?
Um, to be honest, mate, it's not been too difficult to my normal life. I've got to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, the life of an actor is feast or famine. It's my old acting teacher, Michael Armstrong, used to say it's champagne or water days. So you're either incredibly busy or you have an immense amount of downtime. And those sort of in between job moments of an unemployed actor, I got to say, that's kind of like COVID, sitting around trying to fill the day, making sure I'm as productive as possible. So
Right.
my immediate hasn't been affected that greatly by it. I mean, it's been nice. Basically, the last 3 years have been back to back work for me, which has been wonderful.
Mm,
But it's been nice to have some time with my girlfriend and my puppy, um, without any sort of guilt or fear that I'm missing out on anything because the industry's just ratcheted to a stop. So it's been nice to have that forced little pause on life. I mean, ask me in 3 months if I'm still not working and things aren't opening up. I'll probably be pulling out my hair, and my girlfriend will be pulling out his hair, and my dog will be biting out his fur. But
right.
right now it's not too different to normal.
Right. And so you're originally from Luton or Bedfordshire, thousands of miles away from Hollywood. So I was wondering what made you start acting, and did achieving the success you have at this point seem attainable back then?
It's a really weird thing, to be honest, mate. It's I started acting in school plays when I was a kid. So 14, 15, 16, I was acting in school plays, and never thought that the option of acting was ever a profession that I could do. I didn't know anybody who was in the industry, either as an actor
Mm,
or in any other facet of it. I didn't know any. The closest I had was the amateur dramatics group that were in the neighbouring village. And then through school, I did a little bit with National Youth Theatre with school, but to be I was always, as the Americans would call it, a jock. I was always the
right.
sporty one who was. I was on every team I could get my hands, on. I loved playing sport, loved practicing sport, and when I wasn't playing or practicing sport, I was kicking the ball around with my brothers or running. I was always a very active kid. So the idea of sort of dressing up in tights and pretending to be sort of a Shakespearean character didn't really
Mm,
appeal to me. And they were the sort of I didn't know anybody in film or TV, so I sort of pursued a career in sports. I went to university to study sports science in Cardiff. Got a scholarship to study a master's because I was a boxer, and they liked the fact that I won some medals for them. And all
right.
the while, I have no real idea about what I wanted to do until I was talking to an ex-girlfriend of mine, and I was just unhappy. I was working as a bouncer in some clubs in Cardiff, some fairly rough clubs. So I was working there 3 or 4 nights a week. I was training as a boxer 5 days a week in the club, and then I was competing probably once every 3 months, I would say, having a fight.
Mm,
Um, and my life had very quickly skewed from anything creative towards very physical and kind of violent. And I was just unhappy. And she noticed that I had changed and wasn't happy. And she said, "Well, when was the last time you were happy?" And I thought about it, and I was like, when I was doing plays, when I was involved in acting somehow.
mm,
But I've just done five. At that point, was into my 5th year of university doing my masters, and didn't have the time, money, or inclination to be able to put myself into drama school or do anything. So I decided naively, um, or bravely, or whatever you might want to call it,
mm,
to write a play. And my idea was I would self-finance the play in the fringes of the West End and small theatres, and agents would come and see it, and that would be my life as an actor. And a producer, Michael Armstrong, heard about it. Um, we did a prepared read through for him, and he said it needed work, but why did I write the play? And I said I wrote it to become an actor, but he used to be a teacher at RADA, and about 12 years before we met, he'd set up his own acting academy, and he said, "Well,
mm.
I'd love to give you a scholarship to come onto my acting academy, and come and work with my production company and write for my production company." And for 2 years, that's what I did. I did a part-time in London, every Sunday, part-time for 2 years, acting course, worked as a personal trainer 4 days a week, and then worked in Michael Armstrong's production company 1 day a week, which gradually became 2 days a week, working for them doing administrative stuff. And it was basically
Mm.
the best induction I could get into the industry, because not only was I studying acting, although the training was theatrical based, but I was involved watching them put together productions, theatre productions, touring productions, and dealing with all of the administrative stuff of what it means to run a production company. So I was kind of getting this behind the curtains look at what the industry was like. And a very lucky thing happened that I was nearing the end of the acting course that I was doing, the 2-year acting course, just knocking on being 25. And there was a touring production of Miss Julie, a Strindberg play that was put on by Armstrong Arts. And they didn't have an understudy. And the lead, who was playing Jean in the touring production, had gone over to Los Angeles and called and said, I'm not coming back. I've just booked a job. And so it threw them into disarray. And they asked me if I would step in as understudy, and I quickly learnt the lines and ended up rounding out the last part of the tour. And when it came into the West End, I performed in the West End for 4 weeks with it, which was just an incredible gift of a first job. And an agent, that's my puppy howling in the background, if you can hear him. He's just seen a rival dog that's... Hey, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay, buddy. Oh, shh. It's okay. You're fine. You're fine. Yeah,
I can completely relate to that whole thing, though, of just the dog going crazy. That happens all the time to me as well.
Oh, bless him. Yeah, he's good. Thank you, mate. There he goes. I love that about dogs. It's one of the things, many things I envy about dogs, is the fact that they can have the most profound emotions of fear or anger or violence or whatever it happens to be. And then they shake it off, and a nanosecond later, it's like it never even happened. I wish that we as humans could shake our emotions off as quickly and not have residual effects of them. To the point that me and my girlfriend, actually, and she'll probably crucify me for saying this, we've actually said that if we ever, we started doing it now, if we ever have little spats or negative emotions, then we'll both say shake it off, and we kind of do a dog shake, but we start from our bum and end up with my jowls, just doing a shake, and it just makes us laugh, and it kind of works. It kind of works to shake the emotions off, like forcing the brain to stop dwelling on the thing that you're dwelling on. Anyway, so yeah, I did the course, finished the course, ended up on the West End stage, which was a ridiculous dream come true. An agent came and saw me and said he wanted to represent me, and that was 19 years ago.
Yeah, that's classic, right place, right time, then, isn't it? That's worked out really well for you.
Yeah, it was one of those gifts. But I never had aspirations to be in theatre. Theatre, I have a lot of admiration for theatre, and I would like to do more theatre. And I have a lot of admiration for theatrical actors. I mean, the ability to get up and do 8 performances a week and replicate what they're doing and make it fresh and new for the audience every single time is phenomenal. And I love it and respect it. But as a medium, it doesn't make my heart sore. When I was a kid, I wasn't begging my parents to take me to plays. I was begging my dad and my mum to take me to the cinema to see anything I could see. I mean, the Richard Donner Superman all the way through to Star Wars, because I'm a kid of the 80s. Anything I could get my hands on to watch. And when we had a Betamax and then VHS, I would devour movies of anything I could get my hands on, and I'd watch them as many times as I could before we had to take them back. Film was always this thing that just took me to a place that I loved. And so the moment I started acting, and I did a couple of TV shows, and then I did a film. The moment one of the films that I did, Alexander, which was this Oliver Stone film, that had a premiere in LA, I jumped at the chance, came over to LA, took some meetings, and it was always where I knew I wanted to end up, because if you want to be in film, LA and Hollywood is the kind of the mecca.
And I guess kind of unintentionally gave me a segue there, but I was going to say, early in your career, you obviously worked in British TV, and I found some examples like Heartbeat and Dream Team, and I was wondering how what you learned from that period of time has helped in more recent jobs.
That's a good question. I mean, I think, I don't think, I know every single job is always going back to school for me, because I'm always discovering something new in my approach, and also something new in the way that I can convey story through the character, and the way that I relate and liaise with the other actors, with the other creatives on set, the directors, the writers, and everybody else like that, to kind of collaborate to make this thing happen. One of the best and biggest learning grounds for me was Dream Team, because Dream Team, it was either 32 or 34 episodes in a season, and I only did one season. I think it was season 7 of the show, and I came on as this really against type character, which I loved playing. He was this sort of lovable, bumbling buffoon, not the smartest guy in the world, but he won the lottery and used his lottery money to buy the football team, because he always dreamed of being a manager of his dream team. And he was a bit of a buffoon, and was in way over his head. And what I did with that is I used it as just this testing ground to see what worked, because it was the most amount of time I've had being on set and working with a camera. I'd done episodics before. I jumped in and done an episode here, an episode there. But this was my first time to be all day, 5 days a week for 34 episodes. So basically most of the year working in front of camera. And I used it as a technical exercise to speak with the cameraman, find out focal ranges, find out what the difference is when the camera is close up to far away, what that means in terms of performance, because of course your performance is going to alter slightly depending on where the camera is. If you're doing very small nuanced movements, but the camera is all the way across the other side of the room on a flat lens, then it's not going to pick up the nuances. Whereas if you do a big performance when they're in a super close-up, it's going to look terribly overacted. So all these little nuances I started to learn, and I started, the tricks of the trade that you sort of pick up on, instead of darting between the two eyes when you're looking at somebody, we naturally change our focus between the left and the right eye when we look at people. But on camera, that, especially in a close-up, that can look like you've got some strange twitch or abnormality. So you learn to make your focus the camera eye. So whatever one of their eyes is closest to camera, focusing on that, and minimizing blinking. All these various different things are things that I got to practice and explore, and then I would see it, because the show was running concurrently as we were filming. So I would get to watch an episode that I shot 5 weeks before and be like, that didn't work, that was forced, that emotion didn't come through. Let me try it if I'm still. What happens if I'm incredibly still in the scene, and how does that look? And it might sound that I was being sort of disrespectful to Dream Team in doing that, and I wasn't. I was definitely trying to give the best performance I could possibly give, but within there I was using it as a playground to see what worked, what didn't, and hone my skills. And it was invaluable for me. And one of the greatest lessons I got from that is there was a guy called Luke Mabley, who's a fantastic British actor who was in Dream Team, and he went on to star in a film that I wrote several years later, called Star-Crossed, which was again based in the world of football, soccer. And he had been in several seasons of Dream Team before, and they brought him back for 2 episodes in the season that I was in. And this is the point, I'm halfway through the season, and I've kind of figured out how to do everything by that point. And I was good at learning my lines, so I knew that I can learn my lines, and I can turn up and I can do my job. And he turned up one day with this folder with his script in, with his particular scenes highlighted with tabs sticking out from it, and he had these notes all the way over his script. And I said to him, I said, well, what's in the folder? And he sat me down and he showed me the work that he'd been doing, and I realized that it was the work that I used to do when I started out and when I did theatre and when I started out. And this is only 3 years later, but I'd stopped doing on Dream Team because I kind of fallen into a groove that was comfortable, but I'd stopped challenging myself. And he was a very good reminder, Luke, that there's always room to improve and challenge yourself in every role. And it's my job, I see now as an actor, to take the blueprint of the script and figure out how to make it the best it can possibly be. It's not just me standing in front of a camera citing lines. It's me trying to not elevate, because that sounds pompous, but it's me trying to turn that into the best iteration of it that can be. And in that, there's no room for complacency. So I learned so many things from that job that I'm incredibly grateful for, that it's still transposed into my work today.
Right. And speaking of your work today, in Absentia, your character was an alcoholic, and I was wondering, what kind of steps did you take to accurately represent someone battling addiction?
I've had several friends of mine who are alcoholics and drug
Mm.
addicts. Not several friends, but I've had a few friends through the years. Um, and so I spoke to a couple of friends of mine who are alcoholics, and the main thing for me was making sure that I'm not a tourist in that. I didn't want to feel like I was um, doing a poor account of what it would mean to be an alcoholic. I didn't want anybody to be disparaging. And of course, you never judge the characters you play. I can't judge any characters I play because characters don't judge themselves necessarily,
Mm.
and their actions. So playing him sort of open. The big thing for me was leaning into what the cause of his addiction was, and the cause of
Right.
his addiction, because addiction, yes, addiction is alcoholism is a disease, but within there, I believe that alcoholism is symptomatic of an underlying problem, an
Mm.
underlying thing that the person is dealing with, most often emotional slash psychological. And in this case, Jack Byrne had a lot of things that were going on. His father didn't really he loved him, but he loved his stepsister more. And
Right.
so he poured the love that Jack wanted into Emily Byrne, and that wasn't even his blood. So there was an element of resentment there, and the fact of feeling that his father didn't really value and want him. His father always wanted the the sibling, the child to go into policing, which was what Papa Byrne was a policeman, and my
Right.
character ends up in the medical field. So he felt like he was failing his father, but it all came to a head when his sister died, and that's the beginning
Yeah.
of season one. And dealing with the death of his sister threw him off the wagon and led him into alcoholism as a way of burying slash drowning the feelings that he had. And that's the mainstay of all three seasons, is him battling with this addictive personality, but really trying to come to peace with the underlying factors beneath it. And once I started to understand what they were, the alcoholism, the drinking, was less of a thing for
Right.
me. It was about his way of suppressing feelings that are way too raw for him to be able to deal with cognitively. And that meant that I knew how to play it, that didn't feel like I was doing this sort of facsimile of something.
Right. And concurrently, you also play Jordan Marquette or Icicle on Stargirl for DC Universe and the CW.
Hmm.
And since you had a prior working relationship with Jeff Johns on Blade the series, were you approached for that role or did you audition?
No, he approached me. It was January last year, 2019. He just gave me a call and said, "We've been greenlit for this live action version of Stargirl." I knew of the comics because I knew of John, but I'd never read them. And he said, "I'd love you to play the lead protagonist of Icicle." And he pitched me the character over the phone, and I was in. I mean, the moment he started
Mm.
pitching me the backstory of this guy who um, had his family, was perfectly happy with the family that he had, and then his wife died. But his wife was essentially murdered because it was the negligence of a big pharma company who polluted the
Right.
ground that she worked on. And he made it his life mission to not only get retribution for her death, but also make sure other people don't suffer the same injustice as he suffered. So he formed the Injustice Society with
Mm.
his fellow villains, and all of this is in heavy quotations, because
Yeah.
suddenly I realized he's a hero. He sees himself. I mean, every villain sees himself as a hero in some regard, but this one is a very relatable story that he's he's one click away from being heroic. It just so
Yeah.
happens that the way that he does his actions, or the things that he sees as positive to make society better, are actually fairly villainous in other people's eyes. But once he pitched me that story, I fell in love, and I was like, I love this character, because one of the best things I think you can do with a villain, with any
Right.
story and with any character, but villains in particular, is to make audiences relate to them. And if an audience can relate to the villain and empathize with the villain, then they become conflicted because they some part start to root for the villain. And if
Yeah.
you're rooting for the villain of the piece, that's a wonderful dramatic device that causes conflict in the audiences that are watching, because as much as they obviously want Stargirl to win and want good and justice to prevail, within there's a skerrick of them hoping that Jordan succeeds because they love and relate to that character. And that's everything that Jeff created, which I thought was just beautiful.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perspective you touched on because I feel like Jordan is the villain from Courtney's perspective, but if the show was called ISA and Jordan was the main character, maybe people might have a different perception of whether
Yeah.
what he's doing was right or wrong.
I mean, a touchstone, you're absolutely right. A touchstone for us when we were doing it was the Avengers series.
Mm,
And, oh, I'm blanking on his name, the big purple man, Thanos.
mm,
What Thanos was doing in the Avengers series. I mean, his overarching goal was he realized that the universe was essentially cannibalizing itself from overpopulation. And if he could indiscriminately wipe out 50% of the population with a click of his fingers, as heinous as that would seem, the other
mm,
50% would have a greater chance of surviving and thriving. So
right,
basically, he was doing this very, very Machiavellian good, greater good, but within there, 50% of the population had to disappear. And of course,
right,
everyone wants to fight for their loved ones, but he believed that he was the hero. And he was the only one that had the strength of volition to make that hard choice that would ultimately mean that everybody else is better off. And very, very similar to that is Jordan. Jordan believes that
mm,
he is the one who has the strength of character to make the hard choices that ultimately will mean that everybody thrives. And he's okay that he gets labeled as a villain in the process because he knows what he's doing is for the best of everyone. And what a beautiful position to start from, because it's incredibly righteous. And that's been shown all the way through history. I mean, of course, Hitler thought exactly the same thing, and so did the Crusades, and so did Pol
right,
Pot, and so did Hannibal, and every single dictator that's come through has this idea. But when you break down what Jordan's trying to do, there's a great episode, which is, I believe, episode 11. So, minor spoiler alert for anybody who's
right.
listening in the States that gets to see it. But of course, the JSA, Stargirl, and all of her cohorts finally find out what Jordan's plan is. And
Yeah,
several of them go, wait a second, that doesn't sound so bad. Why are we trying to stop him?
mm,
So, what a wonderful place for audiences to be in as well. So when he pitched it to me, I thought it was, I just fell in love with it.
yeah. And in the show, Hunter Sansone plays Jordan's son, Cameron. And I was just wondering because when I spoke with Eric Goins, he kind of discussed the fact that the gambler didn't have a child to motivate him. So, like, how was developing that dynamic and Jordan's motivation?
Well, that's everything for Jordan. I mean, in terms of his motivation on her deathbed, his wife said, "Make sure," paraphrasing, "make sure that you make this world a better place for our son." And then she said, "And destroy anybody who gets in the way of that."
Hmm.
Everything for him is about trying to make a better world for his son to inherit. And I think that that's the motive of every father. Um, Everybody wants to make sure that their children have a better chance at life than they do. It's the overarching desire of anybody who has children. And he's taking it to the ultimate extreme because he has two levels of power, which he wields. First of all, he has a huge amount of independent wealth and is a very renowned businessman. So
Right.
he uses his business acumen and his wealth to try to change the problem. And when he can't do it through sort of business diplomacy, then he ices up and becomes a warrior, and he goes out and does it in slightly nefarious ways. And but everything is from the perspective of making, not just for his son, but primarily for his son, the world a better place.
Right. And of course, as you mentioned, Jordan is the leader of the Injustice Society of America. And you could almost describe the ISA, I think, as almost an ensemble within the wider ensemble of Stargirl. And I was wondering whether you felt any kind of like leadership role among those actors in real life,
In the ISA,
or like just like as an ensemble within the cast. If you felt like, because you were playing the leader, did you kind of feel a sense of leadership as a whole, or
to a degree, I think it's just a natural. It's a natural sort of parallel that when you're on set, and if your character happens to be in a leadership role, normally, I mean, they number the actors on set. They number the
mm,
characters. Sorry, should I say? So the biggest most prominent character is always number one. So, of course, in this show, that's Courtney Whitmore, played
Right.
by Breck. And then every character then kind of, in order of appearance, gets a number. So normally number one on set becomes the leader of the team because they're the
Right.
one that has the most at stake from the project. And it just becomes this natural thing that the number one ends up doing that. And I found that kind of happened with the ISA, that I wanted to make sure that we were knitted as a group. So I would organize dinners and I was going to organize events that we could get together so that we could socialize. So I did feel like it was slightly incumbent upon me to step in, but also that's just kind of who I am anyway. I'm one of these people that the moment I start a job, I start a group WhatsApp so that we're all connected, so that
Sure.
we can communicate. And because having been on sets for the last 19 and a half years, they can be incredibly lonely places, because by
Right.
and large, you've got a large group of people who have traveled from somewhere else to be somewhere. They know nobody else there. They don't even know the people they're working with. And
Mm.
often people have left family, wives, children, husbands, everything. And so it can be an incredibly lonely place when you get to set. And the only thing we really have is each other as actors, and then the crew to kind of knit us together. So there tends to be a lot of very fast bonding that happens the moment you arrive on a job, because they're the people that you rely on socially
Right.
and professionally.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great insight into that whole thing, and especially I think with Stargirl is it's quite diverse. I think about some of the people who were in it, because obviously Christopher Baker, he's all the way from Australia. I mean, I'm sure that's the kind of thing you were talking about, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Or,
he actually lives in New York,
ah,
but still, I mean, you had me coming from Canada.
right,
You had several people from LA, New York actors. Everybody that came in, I think I was the only one that came internationally, even though it's still North America.
right,
But everybody is disparate. There were a few people like Eric, who's from Atlanta, um,
right,
but most of the ISA, most of the cast were from other places. So we've all kind of landed there, knowing nobody apart from the people that we're in. And I've always said that being on set is, you don't have time for the normal process of becoming friends. You don't have
mm,
time for this slow burn of getting to know somebody to figure out if they're going to be in your friendship circle, and grab a coffee once a week until you eventually kind of build up the friendship so it becomes solid. You don't have time for that. The moment you arrive, I presuppose everybody is my new best friend
right,
until figured out otherwise. And then I make every action to accelerate the process of friendship as fast as possible, which is why
yeah,
you can work on a job for 3 months, and yet I'm closer with somebody that I've worked on the job for 3 months with than I might be with some of my friends for 4, 5, 6 years. Not only
right,
because I've seen them so long, but because we've done away with the normal process of friendship. We jump straight into, we're good, we're friends, now let's figure everything out, because you just don't have time for anything else.
right. And speaking of people who are in the cast, two of your co-stars in Stargirl are Luke Wilson and Amy Smart. And I was wondering how was your experience was of working with each of them.
They're both terrible, terrible people,
Uh,
and I hate them to death.
tragic, tragic.
Rotten, rotten black cause. Um, I didn't. I did more work with Amy. I mean, of
Of
course,
course.
I'm fans of their work, and I've seen them through the years, watching a lot of stuff, and it was kind of fun getting to geek out a little bit with them about the stuff that I've watched. I mean, I love this beautiful indie called the Skeleton Twins,
Right,
which Luke was in,
right,
and so I got to talk to him about that. So it was lovely, kind of. It's one of the things I love about my job is that I'm a fan first and foremost, and I love film, love TV, and the fact that I get to watch these people and then at some point work with the people that I've watched and admired is just amazing. Um, and I'm not shy anymore about gushing about fandom when I meet people, because
sure.
there's no point pointing airs and graces. And they're both wonderful people, wonderful people, very, very giving. Luke, I very much admired Luke for the simple fact that he would mine a scene constantly. He was constantly digging and mining a scene to see if he can make it better. So,
Right.
yeah, we might have done 3 or 4 takes of something, and then he'll come up and be like, well, what about if I say this word slightly differently here, and then we add in a pause, and you'd be
Right.
like, yeah, what does that do? And so he would constantly looking at different ways to kind of tell the story in the most efficient way possible. So his mind
Yeah.
was constantly in it. And the same with Amy. The difference with Amy is just such a ray of light, just smiley and happy and wonderful.
Mm.
She's Barbara Whitmore. I mean, she's
Right.
everything you'd expect Amy Smart to be. So she was an absolute joy to work with, incredibly professional, ridiculously good at her job, and just this. Every time you looked at her, she just had a big grin on her face and a smile. So yeah, both wonderful to work with.
Right. And just to preface this next question, I kind of throw in a out of the box kind of one, so just so you're not thrown too much. But so obviously you have starring roles on both Absentia and Stargirl. So I was wondering if you could bring an actor from either one to guest star in the other. Who would you want to see inhabit like the other world?
That's interesting. Um, yeah, it's very interesting. I think it would be it'd be really interesting to see Breck, Stargirl, in the world of Absentia. Breck is Stargirl. I mean, the very first time I met Breck, I'd just flown in because I was shooting The Kingsman in the UK, and
Right. Yeah.
I flew into Atlanta to do 2 days of camera tests and costume tests and makeup tests and everything else like that before I flew back to finish shooting that film. And I arrived into the makeup trailer, and there was this bubbly spark of a girl who was sat with these shocks of blonde hair, and she was like, "Hi, are you Neil? Oh my God, do you play Icicle?" I was like, "Yeah, I do. I play Icicle." I'm Breck. It's like breakfast, just without the first. And I was like, "God, you're adorable." And she is just so bubbly and fun. It would be hilarious to see her in the really dark, gritty, grainy world that's Absentia, because the two are so diametrically opposed. That would be really funny to see. And similarly, it would be really interesting. I would take Patrick. So my character's nephew in
Right.
Absentia. I would take
Yeah.
him and put him in Stargirl, because he'd be the age of the kids. He'd be in there the age of Hourman and everything else like that. And he's had a very different upbringing, where his mother has died, raised by a stepmother. His father's an alcoholic and had sex addiction. He's been shot at. People have been trying to bury him and drown him. And then suddenly he gets dropped into the Blue Valley, and he's part of Blue Valley High. It'd be interesting to see him come in. I think he'd become a villain. I think he'd end up being a villain.
Right. So this is the last question I've got,
Okay.
and it actually kind of ties in because there was one I kind of skimmed over because you kind of answered it. I'll try and combine these two questions together. So you've obviously spoken a lot. Well, you've spoken openly about depression and the fact that you suffered with it, and obviously we're in a very precarious time right now where people's mental health could be affected. So I was wondering, how important do you think it is to be open about your mental health right now? And what would you say to people who might need someone to offer a sentiment to them?
It's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it. I think mental health and talking about mental health issues for me is one of the most important things, because there's still a huge stigma in Britain. You can attest for this. There's a huge stigma around mental health. I mean,
Right.
my mum still calls psychologists shrinks. So you're going to the head shrink. So the
Yeah.
idea of the sort of acceptance, and she's very open and understanding and wonderful, but it's just the vernacular that she uses without thinking about it. So there's still this stigma surrounding mental health in Britain and everywhere. But in addition to that, um, the idea that somebody is depressed isn't an attractive quality. You break your leg, you break your body, you hurt yourself, and everyone wants to rally around to try to help you because they can see that you are broken and they want to help you get fixed. Talking about depression, it's not an attractive thing to be around. It's not there's no sort of sensational quality to it. It's a very, very, very lonely experience for me. And because of the loneliness of the experience, one, it doesn't attract people to you, but the other thing is it doesn't make me want to be around people. When I'm in the malaise of depression, and that sort of black cloud or black dog or whatever you want to call it is at my heels or above my head, all I want to do is hunker down, be on my own, and ride it out. But in there, it makes me feel like I'm incredibly alone, because it makes me feel like I'm the only person on the planet who's going through this. And one of the real sort of, I'll say, joys for me has been being open about my depression and talking about the experience that I've had. And as a result, opening a dialogue with other people who have experienced depression and creating something of a community around it. Because one of the things that's really helped me pull myself out and get help is leaning into the community and finding out that I'm not alone, that these feelings are commonplace, more commonplace than we would ever accept or expect, and that many people are going through this sense. And it's nothing to do with success or failure, riches or poverty, race, creed, anything else like that. Depression couldn't give a shit whether you are black or Asian or disabled or white or middle class. As proven by the fact that so many prominent people, successful people, people who are loved desperately and on the outset can seem to have everything that they would ever want in life, talk about depression or have lost their lives to depression. And people who don't have depression can look at that and say, what have they got to be depressed about? Because they think that depression is sadness. They think that depression is a feeling of self-loathing or woefulness or something like that. And it's not. It can range from a chemical imbalance to an emotional imbalance to just this sense that every so often a malaise kind of comes over and tars everything with a bleakness. And talking about it not only dispels the illusion that people have that it is only something that happens to people who have a reason. You got cancer, therefore you're depressed. Your family member died, therefore you're depressed. You lost your job, therefore you're depressed. And yeah, there can be triggers that triggers the depression, but depression can also happen to somebody who in otherwise might be happy, and depression might click in a way that seems hard to compute for somebody that doesn't understand depression. And it's only through talking about it do we start to dispel the myths around it, raise awareness about it, but more importantly, and this is the one for me, make people who also suffer with depression realize that they're not alone. And what I do with that is I like to talk about things that really help me and have helped me through the years deal with my depression and overcome it in moments. And I've talked quite openly on my page about perspectives. I mean, a big perspective for me is one that I've talked about, is make my future self grateful. When I'm in the malaise of my depression, it's very difficult to think about doing something to kick myself out of it, because there becomes this sort of nihilistic, what's the point? What's the point in anything? The world will keep turning. We live, we die. That's the state of my depression. That it's like, why do we even bother getting up? Because there's no reason or justification for anything. And I find that making a small choice in a moment that may not help me in that moment, but my future self will have gratitude for, has been a huge thing to making steps to pull myself out of that abyss whenever I hit in it. And that can be as simple as doing the laundry or doing the washing up or taking the rubbish out, the trash out, or doing exercise. Because even though in that moment it won't make me happy, I know that my future self will go, at least I don't have to do that. At least this is done. And so I think it's vitally important to have a dialogue about it. And I'm so grateful that I have something of a platform now where I'm able to. And I really appreciate hearing from people who are also living with depression, and the various different tricks and techniques that they use to kind of help navigate their lives and navigate that depressive state.